over here.
Cool. My name is Nuruddin Lemu with the Africa Leadership Initiative with Aspen. Mine is to, firstly, a little like related to what the lady who just made a comment. And I'd like to just pick on what she said. Whether the child has a right to his or her own identity, that whatever they are is a product not of the parent engaging or manipulating or ensuring some kind of genetic determinism, but that when the child grows up, if they find there's anything good or positive in them, they don't look at it as something they are indebted to their parents for. And if they find any weaknesses, as they will have weaknesses, they don't view it as the fault of my parents for having left this weakness or not taken care of it. And so I feel one problem with this issue of, so to speak, genetic determinism, I'm not talking about preventing a problem, health issue, but just the whole idea of improvement, I think turns the child more into a kind of a commodity. And the child really, I think, may have something to blame the parents for. The second one is...
Could I just say one thing about that? I think it's an important point about what happens really is the expansion and the explosion of responsibility. Children now have plenty to blame their parents for. And they will come up with things even if they don't have them, and even if they may not be warned. But if we imagine a world like the Gattaca world, where parents did make the choices that these parents were making, it will transform the dynamic and the relation, not only in the ways we've been discussing about commodifying, instrumentalizing, and so on, hubris, control, but also the parents will be more responsible for more aspects of how their children turn out to be, and that isn't necessarily a good thing. The fact that we are not, as parents, responsible, even the most conscientious parents, for the way our kids turn out, that's a blessing in a way. And if it were fundamentally transformed in a Gattaca-like way, it really would be a major change.
We have lots of people who want to ask questions, so let's keep the questions fairly quick and short if we could.
Yeah. The second point I just wanted to pass through you, whether you think it's a valid one, when it comes to choosing the genetic makeup, or at least to some extent, of a child, is I think it's troubling to know that someone has a problem with what is natural diversity within our species. That somebody has a problem not just with race, which is natural, but then you gradually get tallism and shortism and brainism, Bigfootism, other
Right.
small things. And the question is, where does this improvement stop? What if I find out I could enhance the ability to smell and to see and to hear? Aren't we gradually going to start trying to produce X-Men, to produce people that end up becoming another species? They will most likely be white. They will most likely be rich. And like more or less, they would not want their children to be any less than them. Eventually, we just produce another breed of people who, unless there's a genetic basis to remove arrogance, I think we may not be solving a lot of problems for the rest of humanity.
Well, Elliot, at the beginning you asked, what does a scientist think of these arguments? I can say as a scientist, what I think is that our goal is to improve human health. And we use our knowledge, our efforts, and our goodwill toward that end. I think that is a worthy end, and it has produced some very powerful medicines and has the potential to provide great good for many people. And increasingly, people not only in the wealthy countries, but throughout the world. That doesn't mean that these tools cannot be abused. Humans are tool users. We're homo habilis. We use whatever tool is at our disposal. And we must, in some cases, be regulated in the use of those tools. I think these discussions are extremely valuable, but we shouldn't, when we have these discussions, arrogate to ourselves the choice. It has to be an open, free discussion, and one that is not dependent on any particular religious or cultural value. And it's the hidden religious and cultural values that we have to be sensitive to. These have to be, if we are going to do it nationally, that's one thing. If we're going to have international standards, we have to have a forum for very open international discussion and be prepared to listen to people with very different valid points of view. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is a discussion we haven't had. We have in this country a discussion. What does it look like to someone in Singapore? What does it look like to somebody in northern India, which we seem to have disparaged? They are making those choices for human reasons. We may not agree with those choices, but they have their reasons, and we should listen to them. So I would say, as a scientist, we provide tools. It is important to have a free and open discussion, but not to go into a discussion with a prejudgment of what the outcome will be based on our particular morals, our particular religion, if we are going to impose it on a global scale.
Thank you. Michael.
Well, I'd like to pick, yeah, very good. I'd like to pick up on the point that was made about heightism or tallism or lookism. It's tempting to think that the more choice we have in this domain, the freer we are. Because we're accustomed to thinking of freedom as proliferating choices. And if biotechnology gives us the chance to choose the genetic traits of our children, and if people can choose that, and if they can afford to pay for it, that enhances human freedom. That's one way of thinking about it. But I think that that's a mistaken idea of freedom. Really what freedom means lies very much at the heart of this. Because think about it. When people choose, and Elliot mentioned the growth hormone to enable a child to be on the basketball team. When people choose to answer society's prejudices by changing themselves or their children, what they're doing is leaving those prejudices in place. So if we respond to the prejudice in favor of tall people in our society, not by challenging those prejudices socially, politically, taking them on, but by simply trying to make ourselves or our children taller to fit the prejudice, we've really caved into that prejudice. Or if the people in India who are doing the sex-selective abortions because they want boys, because there's a prejudice against girls, they're using technology to cave into a prejudice. They're leaving that prejudice in place. And so the effect is we think we're freeing ourselves by using technology and high tech. But what we're really doing is we're leaving in place, unquestioned, unchallenged, prejudices that could be otherwise. And so it seems to me that the truer freedom is to try to ask ourselves and to debate as citizens of all our societies, what sort of rewards should go with what sorts of traits and what sorts of contributions. And the more we devote ourselves to just trying to figure out how to save ourselves and to equip our children to compete in a world where the reward system may be unjust in many ways, the more likely we are to leave in place, unquestioned, those prejudices. And so I think rather than try to change ourselves to fit the world, we should try to change the world to make it more hospitable to the strengths and also the imperfections of the human beings that we are.
Thank you both very much.